Welcome to Parent Squad. I'm Felicia Lawrence, and today we're talking about traumatic brain injuries. It's something a lot of us parents don't often think about, but it can happen quickly in unexpected ways. And we want you to be prepared just in case. So here to talk more about it is Riley Children's Health Pediatric Neurotrauma Surgeon, Dr. Laurie Ackerman. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
This is an important topic that I think a lot of parents, you don't feel like it would come across, like you feel like you would know, but unless you actually know what to look for and you know what some of what the experts want you to know, then you could be at a disadvantage.
I think that's true.
Yes, so I am the mom of an almost 2-year-old boy, and I know head bumps are pretty common. So how can you tell if it's something more serious?
I think the vast majority of head bumps are not a big deal, and I think that's always important to keep as a frame of reference. And I always usually tell parents that if a child falls from their own height or less, they're probably fine. It's when you add speed, it's when you add wheels and things like that, or a child falls onto an object with some velocity, that it's a little more tricky. And there are certain signs you can look for. Things that are very worrisome are things like, protracted vomiting, loss of consciousness, bleeding, a dent, or, an area that you palpate on the head that is pushed in, a seizure, or problems moving an arm or a leg. But the good news is that almost all of the injuries in that age group, 75% of what are billed as traumatic brain injuries, are usually the very mild ones, which is good to know.
Certainly good to know. So let's talk about the difference between a concussion and a traumatic brain injury. And can a concussion turn into a traumatic brain injury, or what should we know?
It's a little bit of an interchangeable term. So a concussion is a type of traumatic brain injury, but not all traumatic brain injuries are concussions. So it's a bit of a spectrum.
Okay.
So I think in some ways a concussion was an older term that people used, and a concussion is usually, it can be anything. It used to be a brief loss of consciousness. Now it can just be something that's different. Somebody who hit their head, they have a headache, they're not thinking clearly, things like that. But traumatic brain injury can include things all the way up to and including severe head injuries, things where people lose consciousness or have an open skull fracture or things like that. So actually traumatic brain injury is more inclusive, but a concussion is a type of traumatic brain injury.
Okay, in just a little bit, we'll get more to what parents should be looking for, but let's talk some simple ways to help prevent injury. We know buckling up is one of them.
One of my favorites. Mm-hmm. So I think one of the things, certainly seat belts save lives. I can speak to that personally. Mm-hmm. I was hit on 65 about a year and a half ago. I was wearing my seat belt and I walked away. My car took a lot longer to come back than I did.
Wow.
The seat belts in for adults and children, this isn't specifically pediatric, are good. I think also a good rule of thumb to some degree is if you have wheels on your feet or you're off the ground, a helmet on the head isn't a bad idea.
There we go.
So those are for things like bicycles, skateboards. Actually, it's moved into winter sports. We just finished with the Winter Olympics. You saw all of the snowboarders and the people skiing wore helmets. Certainly, the electric scooters are kind of an up-and-coming type of thing that we see more injuries with. It's just because I think anytime you go faster than your own 2 feet carry you, you're a little more at risk.
And e-bikes I'm seeing in my neighborhood with teens.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, helmets on bikes and scooters. What about, I know we're talking about the head, because now I'm also thinking about the pads that we need. Mm-hmm. Protect everything. You know what, just put the whole child in bubble wrap. I'm thinking about the knee pads and the elbow pads and things like that. Okay, so what are some things that we can do around the house to prevent possible injury? I have a toddler that went from crawling on the couch to now trying to jump off the couch. And I'm like, no, please don't do that.
So one of the things we see commonly, I think sometimes parents aren't ready for when their children start rolling over. And that happens sometimes, anywhere I think from about 2.5 months of age on. So you'll have children who roll off of a bed or off of a couch, and the parent wasn't expecting that the child was going to do that just yet. So I think often children belong probably in their bed or with somebody, but not where they can go from a height. And that's for the very young child. Certainly things like gates, the baby gates, the safety gates. Some people will also sort of pad sharp corners. You have a child who's just learning to walk and they trip and they fall up against like the corner of a fireplace or bricks or things like that. Handrails on stairs, things like that. And keeping stair doors closed with very young toddlers, I think, are all good things.
Yeah, I say it's pretty tough because the childproofing process is an ongoing thing, and I just feel like you never completely, it's never like, okay, I nailed it and I'm done. It just, they keep moving and growing.
There are some wonderful resources out there, and one of my favorites actually, and I'm very fortunate about this, that it happens in my own hospital. So there's something called the Riley Safety Store, and they sell everything at cost. They have a website that you can access. They'll ship to anyone in Indiana. And you can also stop by the hospital, but they will also talk with people about age-appropriate types of childproofing thing. They even have the little straps that keep them out of the playing in the toilet, or latches that keep them out from under the cupboards and things like that, which is less about head injury per se. The other thing, the U.S. has a little bit of the ignominious distinction of being the country in the world that leads in deaths from firearm injury. And I think one of the biggest things, that we would like to put out there is that, if there are firearms in the home, that they are secured where children can access them, because that is a very sad and unfortunately more frequent than we would like type of injury.
Yeah, we do those unfortunate reports on it every year, sometimes multiple times a year, so certainly locking up your firearms. But I heard you on the store with some of these items get really creative, and I think as a parent you have to think of outside the box and get creative when it comes to protecting your child, certainly. Now, when it comes to choosing where the kids play, she says not all playgrounds are equal. So what are you recommending?
I think head injuries on the playground are more common with things like climbing equipment. So you want to make sure that your child is accessing things that are age appropriate. 2-year-olds on monkey bars, probably not quite there yet. But so age appropriate types of equipment, things that are well maintained, things that have, a handrail to hold on to when you're going up the stairs or when you're going down the slide, things that have softer surfaces to land on, things such as wood chips or rubber or sand are a little more forgiving if you take a tumble, and then absence of things to trip over in the area.
Okay, assessing playground safety is important, but it's tough to be 100% of the time. If something does happen and we suspect that it is serious, what are the steps that we should be taking? So
I think there are a couple of things you can think about. There are the more immediate concerns. So if you have someone who has an open bleeding wound, if you have someone who has a depression in the skull, someone who's lost consciousness, had a seizure, complains that their neck or back hurts and has trouble moving an arm or a leg, or a child who has slurred speech, or one who was awake but is becoming less responsive rapidly. Those are all situations in which probably should just call 911.
Certainly.
The other things that parents watch for, sometimes it's not apparent and it's more one of these mild head injuries. So you'll have someone who is sleepy, perhaps develops consistent protracted vomiting, again, weakness, any of those types of things. But sometimes they're more subtle, like just some changes in thinking and sleeping and things like that. And those are also reasonable things to be seen for.
Certainly. Pay attention to your child, and when in doubt, you can always ask a provider.
Your pediatrician, or, I think if you are in doubt, I think it's reasonable to have the child seen. I think it's better to be more rather than less vigilant.
Yes, because at least you go home, you might have an extra bill, but you go home with a peace of mind that an expert has looked at your child. We know this next topic is a no-brainer. However, you know, we do stories every year like this. And so we want to address abusive head trauma and also reminding folks that it's never okay to shake a child. What have you seen in your practice?
I think sometimes it's hard, right? Because you're tired, you have a child who's been crying, you know, you're the only one taking care of the child. I think it's just always better to step away. So if the child doesn't calm, doesn't console, things aren't working, you know, is there a medical issue? You could always, you know, if there's a concern for a medical injury, go to the hospital. But, you know, I think it's good to phone a friend, to maybe just put the child down, even if they're crying, they're breathing. Take a minute, deep breath, and step away and just kind of reassess the situation. But you don't want to violently shake a child or those types of things that when tempers are short and patience is small, like I said, phone a friend or maybe just step out of the moment for a bit.
Emotions are high and sleep is rare.
Yes.
Things can certainly add up and alter situations. Okay, before we go, there were two things that you wanted to make sure folks knew about.
Yes.
A blog as well as a website.
Yeah, there is a Riley Wellness and Health blog that can be accessed through Riley Children's Hospital's website. And the other is a wonderful resource that's out there also, and there's been one developed by the CDC, or Centers for Disease Control, and it's called the Heads Up Concussion Toolkit. So if you go to your computer and you simply would Google Heads Up and CDC, it will walk you right into a beautiful website, and it talks about signs and symptoms of concussion and when to be worried and how to child-proof your home and what to think about when you're evaluating playgrounds and home safety and just a myriad of other things that are really easily accessible, and it's all right there.
Okay, well, thank you so much. We appreciate you lending us your expertise. It's really important when we're talking about keeping our children and our families safe. This is Dr. Ackerman. Thank you.
Thank you.
Those links that she just mentioned, we have so much more info at WTHR.com/ParentSquad. We've got more to come, so stay with us.